Ethereum's story begins during a time when the world was still trying to understand what cryptocurrency actually meant, because when Bitcoin first appeared, it introduced something revolutionary. A digital currency that operated without banks, governments, or centralized control. And for many people, that idea alone was already difficult to grasp. Yet, among the developers and thinkers who were closely studying the technology behind Bitcoin, known as blockchain, there were individuals who began to realize that the technology might be capable of far more than simply sending money from one person to another. And one of those individuals was a young programmer named Vitalik Buterin, who had spent years exploring the possibilities of decentralized systems and writing about cryptocurrency. And as he studied the Bitcoin network, he noticed a limitation that most people had overlooked, because Bitcoin's scripting system allowed only limited types of transactions and logic, which meant developers could not easily build complex applications directly on the blockchain. And Vitalik began asking a question that would eventually change the entire crypto industry. What if blockchain could function like a global computer instead of just a payment system? What if developers anywhere in the world could upload programs to a decentralized network, and those programs would run exactly as written, immune to censorship, fraud, or manipulation, and available to anyone with an internet connection? And this idea slowly formed into what would become Ethereum, a platform designed not just to store value, but to host an entire ecosystem of decentralized software. And in late 2013, Vitalik published a white paper explaining the concept in detail, describing a blockchain that could execute what he called smart contracts, which were pieces of code that automatically carry out agreements when certain conditions are met, eliminating the need for middlemen like banks, brokers, or centralized services. And although the concept sounded ambitious and even unrealistic to some critics, many developers immediately recognized the potential and joined the project, forming a team that included programmers, entrepreneurs, and researchers who believed the internet itself could evolve into something more decentralized and transparent. And in 2014, the Ethereum team launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise funds for development, allowing people to purchase the native cryptocurrency known as Ether before the network was fully built. And this early sale raised millions of dollars, demonstrating strong interest from the global community, which at that time was still relatively small but highly passionate about open technology and financial freedom. And after months of development, testing, and collaboration, the Ethereum network officially launched in 2015, marking the beginning of a new chapter in blockchain history. Because unlike earlier systems, Ethereum allowed developers to build decentralized applications, often called dApps, that could run exactly as programmed without downtime, interference, or control from a central authority. And this capability immediately sparked innovation across many areas, including finance, gaming, digital ownership, supply chain tracking, and identity systems. And one of the most important concepts introduced by Ethereum was the idea that code itself could act as a form of trust, meaning instead of trusting an organization or a company, users could trust the transparent rules written into the blockchain, which anyone could verify. And this created a powerful foundation for what later became known as decentralized finance, or DeFi, where lending, borrowing, trading, and other financial services could be performed directly between users through smart contracts. And as the ecosystem began growing, developers from around the world started experimenting with new ideas, some successful and others flawed. Because, like any new technology, Ethereum faced serious challenges early in its life, including security issues, scalability problems, and debates about governance. And one of the most famous events in Ethereum's history occurred in 2016 with the creation of an ambitious project called the DAO, which stood for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, a concept that attempted to create a community-controlled investment fund governed entirely by smart contracts rather than traditional managers. And the DAO attracted enormous attention and investment, raising a huge amount of ether from participants who believed it represented the future of decentralized decision-making. But unfortunately, a vulnerability in the code allowed an attacker to exploit the system and move a large portion of the funds into a separate account, which triggered panic and intense discussion within the Ethereum community about what should be done, because blockchain technology had been promoted as immutable, meaning once data was recorded, it could not easily be changed. Yet leaving the situation unresolved would mean accepting a massive loss for many investors. And after weeks of debate, the community made a controversial decision to perform a hard fork, effectively creating a new version of the blockchain that reversed the effects of the exploit and restored the funds, while a portion of the community chose to continue using the original chain, which became known as Ethereum Classic. And this moment highlighted an important truth about decentralized systems. Although the technology is based on code and algorithms, human values and collective decisions still shape its evolution. And despite the controversy, Ethereum continued to grow, attracting developers who saw it as a platform for innovation rather than just a digital currency. And over time, new standards were created that made it easier to build tokens and applications on the network, including the ERC-20 standard, which allowed developers to launch their own cryptocurrencies on top of Ethereum. And this eventually led to a massive wave of projects during a period known as the initial coin offering boom, when startups raised funding by issuing tokens through Ethereum, and although many of those projects later failed or disappeared, the period demonstrated the platform's ability to support a wide range of experiments in decentralized technology. And another major transformation occurred when artists and creators began using Ethereum to represent ownership of digital items through non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, which allowed unique assets such as artwork, music, and collectibles to be stored and traded on the blockchain, opening new possibilities for digital ownership and creator economies. And while some people viewed NFTs as speculative or overhyped, others saw them as an early step toward a broader shift in how digital content and intellectual property might be managed in the future. And throughout all these developments, Ethereum also faced technical challenges, especially related to scalability and energy consumption, because the original system relied on a process called proof of work similar to Bitcoin, where miners used computational power to secure the network and validate transactions. But as the network grew, this method required large amounts of electricity and limited the number of transactions the system could process at one time, and developers recognized that if Ethereum was going to become the foundation for a global decentralized internet, it would need to evolve, leading to years of research and development focused on improving the protocol. And eventually this effort resulted in one of the most significant upgrades in blockchain history, known as the merge, which transitioned Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake, a system where validators secure the network by locking up their cryptocurrency rather than competing through energy-intensive mining. And this change dramatically reduced the network's energy usage and represented a major milestone in Ethereum's long-term roadmap, while also setting the stage for further improvements designed to increase scalability, reduce transaction costs, and support a growing number of applications and users. And as Ethereum continued to mature, it also became the center of a broader movement toward what some people call Web 3, a vision of the internet where users have more control over their data, identity, and digital assets rather than relying entirely on centralized platforms. And while this idea remains debated and still evolving, Ethereum has played a central role in pushing the conversation forward by demonstrating that decentralized infrastructure can support complex systems beyond simple payments. And today, the network supports thousands of projects, including decentralized exchanges, lending platforms, gaming ecosystems, governance experiments, and digital communities that coordinate using blockchain-based tools. And although the future of cryptocurrency remains uncertain and influenced by regulation, technological competition, and market cycles, Ethereum continues to be one of the most influential platforms in the industry because of its flexibility and developer community. And what makes the story particularly interesting is that it represents not just the creation of a cryptocurrency, but the attempt to redesign how trust works in the digital world, moving from institutions and intermediaries toward transparent systems governed by code and shared consensus. And whether Ethereum ultimately becomes the backbone of a decentralized internet, or simply one step in the evolution of blockchain technology, its impact is already significant, shaping how developers think about software ownership, digital identity, financial access, and global collaboration. And the journey from a white paper written by a young programmer to a global network used by millions shows how powerful ideas can grow when communities form around them, experiment with them, challenge them, and continue building despite setbacks. Because in many ways, Ethereum is still an unfinished project, constantly evolving through upgrades, proposals, and innovation from people around the world who believe that technology can create new forms of cooperation and opportunity. And as the network continues to develop new capabilities such as scaling solutions, Layer 2 networks, and more advanced smart contract frameworks, the original vision of a decentralized world computer continues to influence researchers, entrepreneurs, and creators who are exploring what is possible when software is open, transparent, and accessible to anyone willing to participate. And that ongoing exploration is really what defines Ethereum's story, not just its past achievements, but its role as a platform where the future of decentralized technology is still being written.